I've been working, in fact, with different countries formerly related with Portugal during colonial times. But because there is not much data about it, and for the sake of time, of course, I will restrict my example to Angola. And of course, I'm happy to discuss other countries like Cape Verde or Mozambique, especially Mozambique, where very interesting studies are going on. If you look at the planet, it's easy to accept that we are occupying a lot of space, we are increasing very quickly, we are changing balances. So we might agree with David Quammen that we are sort of an outbreak. But his idea, the idea in his book was to try to uncover the threats of emerging infectious diseases. And he has a very interesting couple of chapters on the Ebola, anticipating the Ebola crisis, but in reality things might be different. The threats might come from a different area, and that's the one we are here talking. It's the non-communicable diseases that are responsible for that are a major cause of morbidity and mortality in the world. And if they are decreasing in high and rich societies, they are clearly increasing in low and middle income countries. And they represent, as you know, almost 75% of the deaths that occur with these causes. If most of these premature deaths occur in Africa, it is well recognized that there are clear different regional knowledge gaps. And it's at least interesting from a certain perspective to see that the Portuguese-speaking countries are cited as examples of limited cardiovascular reports. And most of the time, what we are talking about here is diagnosis, is causes of death. But it would be very much interesting also to know, and there the gaps are really important, to know about the risk factors. Not only those that are listed here, but if you accept that we had something with this review of cohorts in Europe and US showing that social stratification brings an additional dimension of information, it would be very important to know what's going on in these countries. Let me give you an example from Portugal, that just to remember that we know that the migration and in general population mobility is a major issue in sub-Saharan Africa, in different countries for many different reasons, and in the former Portuguese colonies, it's exactly the same. And if you look here, for instance, to the trends in low birth rate in Portugal during the last 20 years, you see that it's increasing, nothing extraordinarily remarkable. But if you look what happened to low birth rate in migrant women, you can see, using a simple joint point approach, that financial crisis revert the trends. So I'm bringing this to know that there is a clear gap also in knowing what's the role of the large mobility of human populations in these African countries, how it's going to impact in health in the future. Are we able, as researchers namely, to understand, to measure, to describe its roles, especially if there are events that act clearly early in life, and early life events, as you know, have a huge importance in the future. There is a lot of debate about the role of established risk factors, and if especially we can take it from one place to the other, if we need to have different approaches to study the disease, the epidemiology of non-communicable diseases, and it seems important to look at the way that the phenotypic presentation evolved, and to look at the peaks of like bone mass, like blood pressure, but especially other aspects like diet or violence or infections as they influence, for instance, cancer. And this is an example from an old work we did that, where we saw that in Africa there is a lot of Helicobacter pylori infection and not that much gastric cancer. And you have almost a beautiful, clear, linear increase in Europe, for instance. And if you look at the importance of other factors like smoking or alcohol or vegetables, you see that different combinations of these factors might change the final frequency of a disease like gastric cancer. And it would be interesting to see if the changes, the trends in for instance, in access to alcohol and in smoking in these countries are changing the frequency of this type of tumors in populations where the prevalence of HP is around 80% or sometimes more. So there was this idea of having a life course approach to study these problems in these populations as in other places. It has been done, as you know, life course has been around for more than 50 years, but not only to understand why things are happening, but also to design strategies to action. However, if you look, and you can play around this is just an example, life course in Africa, in published papers, you see that's something like a couple hundred, but when you go through the titles and the abstracts, you find almost anything. So the idea of having birth cohorts or other type of cohorts like those described in these two books, one from the US, the old grant study of sophomores from the 39 to 44 in Harvard, or the English birth cohorts after the Second World War. Is it possible to have a similar approach in other societies? We know, yes, for instance, in South America and in South Africa, but in other parts of the world, it has been very, very, very difficult. So we try to begin this something similar using the DEND Health Demographic Surveillance System. This is an area north of Luanda, sorry, where people has been studied for at least almost a decade, and it is a special area because it was a sort of a buffer zone during the civil war in Angola. We tried to test two different approaches. One was to survey the same population 2 years after an initial baseline evaluation, and the second one was to have a cross-sectional approach to make the base for a follow-up study every 3 years. As you see here, the number of participants that were involved in these studies. This is just a couple of images of the way we used it. We had the field evaluation, as you can see here. We collect blood, we measure the blood pressure, we made questionnaires. We even were able to make ECGs. So not always was things so difficult, but it was just to give you an idea of the conditions of work that many of you know. And when you look at when we tried to make a longitudinal study to test the incidence of hypertension, as you see here, we only could find 1/3 of the involved population, which was really a tremendous number of people lost to follow-up in the same region, and it was mainly because of the mobility I was talking about. But it allows us to make probably surely the first measurement of incidence in Angola, and one of the first we are aware in this part of the world. And as you can see, the values for the incidence are quite close, if not higher than those known for certain European countries or in China. And the relation with the factors like abdominal obesity, alcohol consumption, were also possible to show. Then we defined and described the protocol for the study that is now in the first evaluation, 3 years evaluation. It's going to begin. Sorry for this large number of numbers, but just to give you the idea of the tremendous differences between gender differences regarding education, as you can see, much lower among women, obesity much higher among women, smoking and alcohol, mainly a male exposure. And here we had some results for the prevalence of hypertension in this large group of people, also of diabetes, and of hypercholesterolemia, which was not seen before. And as you can see, there is no gender difference except for cholesterol values. We also tried to measure and to evaluate awareness of all these problems. And as you see, that's not tremendously different for hypertension from what was described 20 or 30 years ago in other societies, in Western societies. But as you can see, hyperglycemia and diabetes, and especially cholesterol, was almost unknown to this sample of the population. And finally, we also tried to look at tobacco prevalence, and especially to dependence using the Fagenstrom score. And as you can see, it's interesting to see that it's not in this slide, but there was a clear decrease of smoking with the social class measured by education, both in women and in men. And as you see, the age of beginning to smoke is relatively high compared, for instance, to what's happening in Europe. And the level of dependence is not that high. So these are some examples of trying to look at this population and their kids. That's the next wave, and we expect to do better if it's true that we can use these, for instance, the mobile phones or Wi-Fi that is increasing in this part of the world. If we believe that a life course approach is something that is possible, it's not a waste of money, and it might help to build local research capacity, which was one of the interests and the goals behind all these works. Thank you very much.